Our man in Parliament, Brian Lilley, has his take on Justin Trudeau's new cabinet that was sworn in today. You can see it elsewhere on our website. Let me give you my thoughts at first glance. First of all, I'm pleased to see some disasters were avoided. Andrew Leslie, the hyper-partisan former general from Ottawa, was not appointed defense minister. I'm sure he's stunned. He had an air of entitlement about him. Did you know both of his grandfathers were actually ministers of defense in their day? Instead, this man, Harjit Sajjan, an MP from Vancouver, is in. I think that's great. He's an ex-cop who joined the army, was the first Sikh to command a regiment in Canada. It's a grand Sikh tradition going back centuries to be loyal soldiers in the British Empire. This is a promising appointment, especially when the alternative was Andrew Leslie. Another bullet dodged was the just awful Toronto loudmouth, Adam Vaughn. Now, being a loudmouth is obviously part of the job description for being an MP, but Vaughn was more of a pundit than a thoughtful advocate. It was his bomb-throwing journalistic style. He was a former reporter. He'd attack anything he didn't like, such as Alberta's oil sands, regardless of whether it was in his jurisdiction or party policy. Vaughn probably thought he was going to get a plum appointment, and he did the country a service by defeating the NDP's Olivia Chow. But Trudeau was smart enough not to bring an undisciplined human hand grenade like Vaughn into cabinet. Now, to me, the greatest relief is to learn that Omar Alghabra, Trudeau's chief Muslim organizer and the former president of the extremist Canadian Arab Federation, is not in cabinet. Alghabra's politics were truly extreme. When he ran the Arab Federation, it was positively pro-terrorist. Seriously, it was against criminalizing terrorist groups. And it was anti-Israel to the point of being anti-Semitic. Trudeau tapped all that for his election campaign, but he didn't put that man in cabinet, given that Alghabra says he was actually once on a no-fly list. Seriously, imagine that. There may have also been RCMP security concerns, so bullet dodged. Finally, former Toronto Police Chief Bill Blair isn't in. Blair had a lot of ethical questions around him, from his partisan policing style to his handling of the G20 protests to his position on racial profiling called carding. It's ironic that racial and gender profiling, that is quotas for minorities and women in cabinet, probably kept Blair out, and that's probably a good thing. So that's who's not in. Well, who is in? Ralph Goodale, the old warhorse from Saskatchewan, is in as public safety minister. I think that's as good as you're going to get in the Liberal Party. He has some prairie sensibility to him also, I hope, especially when it comes to firearms. Lawrence McCauley is back as agriculture minister. He's an old hack from the Chrétien era who had to resign from cabinet back then over conflict of interest allegations. But hey, he had a huge rally for Justin Trudeau, so he's collecting his patronage reward. It's a bit of comedy to give the agriculture ministry to someone from the smallest province instead of Alberta or Saskatchewan or even BC and Ontario. But hey, that's Liberal patronage, so much for real change. Stephane Dion as Foreign Affairs Minister is an interesting choice. First of all, because Chrystia Freeland so obviously wanted that position. Dion is less goofy, less buzzwordy, less showboaty, more cerebral, professorish, low-key. Trudeau knows that Freeland, who loves to ham it up on late-night talk shows in the U.S., would be a walking gaffe machine and a publicity hound, stealing headlines and getting into trouble. She's in international trade, but Stephane Dion is famous for being invisible, even when he was the party leader, and his obsession with global warming fits right in with Trudeau's one true foreign policy belief. Carolyn Bennett from Toronto is Indian Affairs Minister. That's just bizarre to me. She's from downtown Toronto. It's just weird. Maybe Trudeau just wants her out of Toronto. I don't know. I think Indian chiefs will soon grow to hate her. She's a walking, talking buzzword, sloganator, cliche meister, a white woman who speaks with a forked tongue, and so utterly condescending. I think it's a disaster in the making. Another old Liberal hack is recycled. That's Scott Brison in as Treasury Board President. I suppose as a former stockbroker, at least he has some familiarity with how money is earned, not just how to spend it, so it could be a lot worse. John McCallum is another old Liberal hack. He's back in as Immigration Minister. So weird. He has no background in it. He's a former banker, former defense minister, an old Chrétien retread who frankly has had issues with drunkenness in public. It's a real surprise that he's back in over other fresher talent who can control themselves. I'm not going to go through the entire list. Bill Morneau is the new finance minister. He's from Toronto Centre, a former private sector pension fund manager, an MBA. Again, could have been a disaster appointment, but the question is, will he really be his own man, or will he just carry out Trudeau's agenda of massive deficits, tax hikes, spending sprees, I don't know. Jodie Wilson-Raybould is the new Justice Minister. She's an Aboriginal woman, and she's a leader from BC. It's a symbolic appointment. It'll be interesting to see if she runs with Trudeau's soft-on-crime agenda as Justice Minister, for example, abolishing mandatory minimum sentences for violent crimes, and how that could be possibly squared with cracking down on violence crimes against Aboriginal women. How do you square that circle? Another Aboriginal appointee is Hunter Tutu from Nunavut. As Fisheries Minister, that's a head-scratcher. I mean, the country's fisheries are on the BC coast and the Atlantic coast, not the Arctic coast. It's just a strange fit. I'll say one thing for him, though. He's against the Liberal Party on gun control, as everyone in the North is, so maybe he and Ralph Goodale can hold the line on that. Kent Hare from Calgary is Veterans Minister. He has no connection with that file either, but he's an earnest guy. I know him, went to law school with him 20 years ago. It's nice to have a Calgary seat at the table. Amarjeet Sohi from Edmonton is Minister of Infrastructure. He's an alderman who will now be in charge of handing out tens of billions of dollars in pork to other aldermen across the country. This will not end well. Mariam Monsef is Cabinet Minister in charge of democratic institutions. She's a refugee from the Taliban in Afghanistan. As you can see, she does not wear a burqa or a niqab, so hopefully she knows how evil those tools of misogyny are more than her naive Prime Minister does. Jim Carr from Winnipeg is the Minister of National Resources. He's on record calling for a carbon tax, but of course so is Trudeau himself. It's a done deal, really. Of course, he's not really the chief decision maker on oil and gas. That's Catherine McKenna, the Environment Minister. She's a cookie-cutter copy of Gerald Butts, Trudeau's senior advisor and anti-oil sands activist. And that's the thing. Trudeau announced in advance that his cabinet was going to be an exercise in quotas. Just the right number of men and women and minorities and Aboriginals and people from this place and that. And that is part of cabinet building, to be sure. But the real power in the Prime Minister's office is Gerald Butts, Trudeau's chief advisor, chief babysitter, chief speechwriter, chief strategist. And he's a Marxist who fancies himself an intellectual. He reads neo-Marxist economic books like Thomas Piketty's discredited book called Capital. He believes every word of it. He's the architect of Dalton McGuinty's disastrous Green Energy Act that has given Ontario the highest power prices in North America and helped turn Ontario into a have-not province. Gerald Butts was for years the leader of the World Wildlife Fund Canada, which took U.S. lobbying money to attack the oil sands and pipelines. Butts invented the energy poverty celebration called Earth Hour, where we're all trained to sit in the dark as some sign of social righteousness. Gerald Butts is the most powerful man in Ottawa after Trudeau himself. I'm worried about him more than anyone in cabinet. Butts is an extremist on an ideological mission. Justin Trudeau has no internal ballast. He has no compass of his own. He borrowed Gerald Butts' compass. He owes his prime ministership to Butts. He doesn't have the gravitas to disagree with him, and cabinet doesn't have the power to. In the weeks and months ahead, we'll see how it all works out. Hope for the best. Prepare for the worst. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.